cars, there are great cars, and then there are cars that could like trip an elderly woman and you'd probably say, well, she probably had it coming. They're just too perfect. There's something about certain platforms where the manufacturers that built them had one thing in mind, and that was building a badass car for the market that they were in. Nothing more and nothing less. And you wouldn't necessarily see this sort of mantra happen too often, specifically because nowadays everything is either way too expensive to make a unicorn car that doesn't have some sort of inherent weakness, and people just don't find that very interesting anymore. They just pretty much want the best deal. To find some of these cars, you either have to find the golden nugget in the new market, something like a BMW M2 Competition, or you have to have big pockets for something like the brand new GT4 RS, which is going to have a longer wait time than probably picking up a PS5. But to take it back 3 decades or so, and you have another one, okay? One that you probably know and remember, okay? Gotta internalize my inner Jeremy Clarkson monologue. The Nissan GT-R. God, that was terrible. I'm Alex Edify on Instagram, and today we're gonna be talking about the legend that came and went and then returned with a different title, and has more diehard fans on TikTok than Tom Brady does whenever team he seems to be playing on these days. Sports ball, I don't get it, I don't understand it. If somebody wants to teach me how it works, that would be great. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're gonna be talking about just what happened to the Nissan Skyline GT-R. And if you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe. We're trying to get to 1 million subscribers, and your support would be super duper appreciated. Of course, if you're looking for aftermarket wheels, tires, or suspension, or performance parts, be sure to hit us up over at fitmentindustries.com. And if you don't want to wait, you can actually start by quick delivery these days and get your stuff to your door in as little as 10 days. You might be wondering why we keep saying that. Because it's a bitch to buy anything right now that's not like kitty litter or cat food. And why am I keep referencing cat stuff? Because we still have a lot of cats. No big deal, but it kind of is. We're like Jeff Bezos up in here without the pee bottles. Also, drop a comment below on if that was too much, because at this point, I don't know anymore. We're looking to know what sort of videos you'd like to see come from Fitment Industries in 2022, whether that's blowing cars up or doing, more of this. The Nissan GT-R is a name that probably needs no introduction. It first appeared in February of 1969 and has since dominated the performance tuner market with its rate reduction, high performance engine layout. That's all there is to it. Great engine layout, good with the weight reduction. Okay, fun fact, the original GT-R actually took home 33 first place trophies in the first 2 years with the coupe variant, winning 50 of them through 1972. When the GT-R came out, it was a monster. The car that would take the winning streak away would ultimately just be the RX-3, which is an equally sick car that we should all want to own one day, just not as popular. All right, the only hiatus the GT-R nameplate would ever take during its run would be during the 1972 oil crisis, where the consumer market looked down upon the sports car market and anyone that was overutilizing their vehicle, because that was, kind of like a thing you just didn't do back then, because you were kind of an asshole if you did. Nissan, being a Japanese-based company, doubled down on this ethical scrutiny and jumped out of any racing activities, in addition to cutting the cords to reproduce a GT-R variant in their Skyline mark. The next purely labeled GT-R within the Skyline brand will come in 1989, where people like you and people like me truly know the car for. Now, the predecessors of the R32 do have their own history and lineage, and there's a lot back there, and there's something back there that's truly special that carried into the R32, and that was the fact that they wanted to make a properly good sports car. However, special mention kind of sort of needs to happen. There's no way the 8th generation Skyline would have ever featured a GT-R trim option had the 6th generation not been a success for rejuvenating the interest of the Skyline name in its prominent home country, specifically in Japan. Nissan went through a very specific marketing promise in that generation of cars to bring back the GT-R, which is what spiked the R32. Nissan really wasn't having the best of times after the shift of the oil crisis consumer interest with the Skyline, and it was that 6th generation marketing push that actually brought it back to the fold, where like Nissan and the fans were just really wanting to make one again. The fans were like, hey, and Nissan was like, yes, and Nissan fans were like, gimme. And that's what Nissan did. They pretty much gave the fans what they wanted. 554 GT-Rs would be built in gunmetal gray, hosting an RB26DE TT twin turbo with 316 horsepower and brought down to 276 horsepower with muffler restrictions, boost changes, and ECU modifications for the sake of the gentleman's agreement that they were going through back in the late 90s, early 90s. That's why the cars were such a modification powerhouse, because they came from the factory with 50 or 60 horsepower to tap into with pretty much doing nothing. And because the GT-Rs like aim to beat beat was the famous Porsche 959, which it did on track records. The car would be the signature piece in Nissan's racing introductions and take home literally every trophy that was humanly possible. It was almost agitating how often the GTR would win back in the early 90s. Now, the name Godzilla was actually coined from the R32 GTR success, specifically from the Australian motoring press. They were the ones that dubbed that name because it was a Japanese car that was destroying everything. The R33 would take everything that made the R32 great and also suck because the R32 did have some balancing issues and some lifting issues at high speeds, and the R33 came in to make it even better. Most don't really like the R33, but I do. I think that it's an actual really good, well-made car, and that's final. It dominates performance and it would do a lot of things better, but it wouldn't actually get as many trophies as the R32 because the R33 didn't play in the motorsport realm as much. Now, the R34 is the golden nugget of Skylines, bringing in the biggest dogs you could. Nissan would produce the GTR in 1998 all the way to 2002 with all the money they managed to make from the 90s bubble. They were big. These cars were big. They were fast, and they were driven by our very favorite blue-eyed, blonde-haired boy that was cool, calm, and collected, Paul Walker. His brother, actually, though, Cody Walker, is very similar, and he's actually a super nice dude, and he's what actually helped us connect our full car giveaway that we just did with our Honda S2000 with Reach Out Worldwide, where we're making a donation to with the donation of the car. And it's a pretty full circle for me because I remember watching the prelude of Too Fast, Too Furious, where Paul Walker was driving I think it was like a 92 3000 GT VR4 with a body kit on it. That's what ultimately sparked me buying my 1994 Mitsubishi 3000 GT when I was 17 years old. But outside of the emotional roller coaster that follows the story, the GTR would ultimately fade into the distance alongside plenty of 90s legends that we now 100% overpay for. We're okay with overpaying for it. You get boba tea or whatever it is, it's like $12. It's not really worth it. But why? Why exactly, and what exactly happened to the Nissan Skyline GTR? Why did it transition a nameplate into infinity, and then why is the new Nissan GTR withheld from the Skyline Why did it transition a nameplate into infinity, and why is the new Nissan GTR withheld from the Skyline nameplate here in the United States of America? Woo! This is 60 minutes. I don't know if I can say that. Are we gonna get sued for that? I don't know anymore. Let's get the easy stuff out of the way. The R35 is not a Skyline, as the Nissan GTR, the one that we know here in the States, does not share a platform chassis with the Infiniti. It is truly its own vehicle and chassis, and as such, here in the United States, it's just dubbed the R35. Whereas the R32 and R34 were the highest trim option of the Skyline platform that you could get in all sorts of different options. So that's inherently why they did it. In addition, there's a couple more marketing gaps that they wanted to cover, and they wanted to make sure that United States could kind of do its own thing, internationally as well. The Nissan Skyline GTR or R34 that ended had a lot to do with a branding decision made by Nissan and their international market strategy. You see, Nissan Skyline R34 and its predecessors were built for the local market, i.e. Japan. Predominantly Japan. Secondary market, a little bit of Australia. And within Japan, there was an incredible amount of intricate, objective manufacturer tactics and metrics that they had to try to hit to make sure that their car would sell. Things like vehicle size, weight, emissions, and overall impact to the local landscape are just some of those things where people have to pay taxes on the car that they buy depending on how big it is. Now, one that's just not high on that list though, as the rest, is safety equipment. Now, the United States of America, on the other hand, due to its typically large infrastructure and long highways and more normalized behavior of driving literally everywhere to do everything, has a more stringent approach to safety because people are behind the wheel much more often. That's why you'll often find companies bragging about safety equipment, and particularly this was common when people were importing a lot of vehicles as they didn't harbor the same crash ratings, airbag deployment locations, and more. And that was one thing the United States was doing pretty well with their car manufacturers. And it's a pretty interesting thing to actually look into. But regardless, these increasing safety precautions alongside the growing focus of international sales for Nissan to even survive meant that the driving interest of the Skyline GTR just wouldn't survive. It would not make it into a point where Nissan could actually afford it. So Nissan had to make a call that worried a lot of their OG fans, and that was to end the lineup for a few years to innovate the platform so that it could be sold internationally and meet all the needs of any sort of country out there in the United States. Not the world, mostly just the I'm just kidding, the world. So that's what they did. They teased it like a low quality Sears catalog from 2001 to 2006 until an actual car would come to life with a new tag, a new chassis, and new safety and emission equipment to be sold internationally, and that would be called the Nissan GTR, the R35 that we all know and love, and the thing that Mario drives literally all over the place. And since the R35 has equally dominated the tuner world with its twin turbo V6 6 lineup and chassis design, it is also an absolute beast. The early generations did feature some issues, but after 2012, the GTR would start to truly blow up in terms of aftermarket support. Pre-2012, the transmissions are a little wonky in the early generations, and their launch control are skeptical at best. Now, there are some of those that think the new Nissan GTR is not the same as the R34, R33, or R32, but what's important to remember here is that it's probably a little bit of a nostalgia play that's at hand. The R35 is a dominant player in its own right and should be treated as one. It has a huge modification support, a massive community, just like those that the predecessors did. Sure, the Skyline crossover into Infinity's shared chassis platform could be deemed a Skyline, but it shares its typical nameplate alongside to the extent of the R31 and R34 Skyline did, and that's not really what people are looking at. They really are looking at the GTR trim within the Skyline. However, the Skyline name is more than just a chassis though. It was the end of a complex recipe and vision that a group of people had for the car that came from a generation before us. And that's why just calling an Infiniti a Skyline and trying to compare the two cars can sometimes just feel weird because it's two different, I don't know, DNAs. The same ingredients in front of an amateur versus a pro, and you'll always get two different cakes. The GTR nameplate, both after the Skyline word and without it, is an acronym for a powerhouse of a car, and one that definitely needs to be respected. It does carry a similar weight to the names of the 911, M, AMG, and more. And as long as Nissan doesn't mess up their finances, which they seem to do more often than not, we will continue to get a car that's carried with the right recipe for decades. Turbo, compression, all-wheel drive, technology, and just enough of a Lego for the aftermarket enthusiast to build on. Whether it comes down to what happens to the original Nissan Skyline R34 and its predecessors, well, it's kind of like a kid that moved out and learned how to be, you know, its own person. And that's what the R35 is. But what do you think? Overhyped and overpriced or worth it? Let us know in the comment section below. And of course, if you're looking for aftermarket wheels, tires, or suspension, be sure to hit us up over at fitmentindustries.com. I'm Alex from Fitment Industries, and we will see you later. Goodbye.